All right, YouTube. Of course, I've now endorsed Donald Trump for the presidency. That doesn't mean, though, that when he says or does something objectionable, that I'm not going to point out the fact that he did. Nor does it cause me to become biased in my analysis. I've already said Trump's got like a 90% chance of winning the election. But this is a sticking point that I've had for some time. No offense against Trump, I suppose, because almost every other candidate on both sides, I think Rand Paul and Jim Webb may have been the only two people ever in the running that didn't fundamentally agree with what Trump has now suggested. Nor is Trump the first to suggest it. Obama did. Obama suggested it. House Republicans at various times suggested it. I think Boehner suggested it. Clinton has supported the idea, certainly Sanders. The idea that the government can strip a person of their Second Amendment rights because they happen to be on the terror watch list, I disagree. I think it's quite clearly a violation of the Constitution. You cannot convert, if you're the government, rights into privileges. Unfortunately, what the terror watch list represents is an often flawed and extremely expansive list of individuals who have, for no warrant has been served necessarily. Their Fourth Amendment rights are certainly being violated on a daily basis. I don't care if this person's a religious zealot or not. They still do if they're a citizen. They have certain rights the government cannot usurp. One of those is the right to privacy. I argue that the very existence of such a watch list violates that. I think get a warrant, conduct a proper search. If you think that there's wrongdoing going on, get a warrant. I don't mean from a FISA court. Get an honest-to-goodness warrant from a real court of law and seek charges against the person. If they don't stick, then obviously there was no reason for them to be on any sort of retarded watch list to begin with. The idea that the government can expand this completely arbitrary category of people who is already barred from, for instance, getting on an airplane for no apparent reason. I would argue that the right to free travel domestically is also enshrined in the Constitution in a de facto sense under the Fourth Amendment, among others. To deprive them as well of the Second Amendment leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Now, like with Gary Johnson when I supported him, I said this is the candidate I back, but that doesn't mean I agree with him on borders, and that proved to be too much of a sticking point for me, really. I didn't agree with him on, business association. With Trump, I'm deeply disturbed by his take on domestic surveillance. I have a feeling he's not quite as in favor of domestic surveillance as he proclaims to be, while masquerading as further right than he actually is. For instance, like gay marriage issue. He said, I believe in traditional marriage. Well, no, he doesn't. Back in the 90s, he said as much. He didn't care. He still doesn't care. He's just playing the part, essentially. On this, though, this has already been suggested both by the Republicans and Democrats. Now, when something is suggested by and propped up by both parties, tendency is it's a bad idea. You look at the TPP. You look at raising taxes, voting Congress a raise. You look at any of the sort of police state stuff. Any time where the Republicans and Democrats agree, it tends to be not in the interest of people's liberty, not in the interest of support of the Constitution. And my plea to Trump is, of course, you've got to understand, if we don't fight for the Constitution, there's really no purpose to even bothering having a nation, because what the fuck do we stand for? That's been my sticking point with many other politicians as well. It's all well and good to say, well, we've got a problem and here's how we're going to solve it. If it doesn't conform to the Constitution, it's just a steady eroding of the fabric of our society at large. Our civil society, our political society, as far as it goes, and of our stability. I would argue that it makes people far, far less safe when their constitutional rights are eroded. We look at much of this domestic surveillance that we do have, courtesy of people like W and Obama. Has it made us any safer? No. The terror watch list doesn't stop any attacks. The NSA hasn't stopped a single attack. The FBI is seeking to expand its own surveillance powers, so it no longer needs a warrant either, which is also blatantly unconstitutional, and I predict that will stop not one attack. The fact is that these bureaus are too grossly micromanaged, too inefficient to do anything. and the politicians are inept and bought off in many cases. The fact that Trump may be egomaniacal enough to try to do a good job or patriotic enough to actually think, yes, I want to solve these problems, and he's not just some other fucking shill like Obama or W promising to fix problems that both parties had a hand in creating in the first place, doesn't mean he can take such an idea and actually make it constitutional. Because pragmatism can sometimes be a good thing, but at other times it does need to be ruled by ideology. The central founding core principle of this nation is liberty. We've already done just about everything we can to denigrate liberty in this country, from needing a license to do things which the founders would not have intended you to need a license for. The very idea is a conversion of a right into a privilege. Driver's license, hate to say it, it's unconstitutional. It is, quite clearly. A license to go fishing. A license to build a garden on your property, to catch rainwater and drink it. None of these things should be understood as illegal, specifically because it's unconstitutional for any state or the federal government to pass a law against it. The Second Amendment is one of the most powerfully enshrined. It's also one of the most explicit. A lot of people, like the Obamas and Pelosi's, they'll argue, oh, well, you know, it's debatable. Maybe it doesn't really protect a citizen's right to keep and bear arms, which is what it fucking says in the first place, so I'm not sure what they're talking about. We get the California Appeals Court ruling, of course, that they think that there's no actual tradition of it meaning that individuals can own firearms. I would say, what are you talking about? People have literally always owned firearms in this country. They've also, at most points in our history, been free to manufacture whatever armaments they happen to want as private businesses, unconnected and not overseen directly by the government. When they were making the first sort of interchangeable weapons in the 1800s, the government bought a lot of them, but did you need permission to actually manufacture them? No, of course not. You simply were trying to turn a profit as a private business. The government might invest in weapons manufacturing, but that doesn't mean it's not traditionally done by private individuals in their own business endeavors. Certainly, when we look back at the founding of the United States, who actually took up arms and who were they fighting against? The British subjects of the Americas took up arms against their own government, and they were private citizens. They were not a standing military. The second that the fighting stopped, the vast majority of them went back to their farms. They were citizen soldiers. It's a closer approximation now to say the state guards represent sort of that aspect of the militia. But the militia has already as well been ruled by the Supreme Court as entailing all citizens able to muster arms in time of war or in time that they happen to need it. There's absolutely a protection of private weapon ownership. There is no excuse whatsoever for the government to even consider itself to have the power to strip somebody of their Second Amendment rights on a whim simply based on putting them on an arbitrary watch list that was not the result of a proper trial, which is also due a person under the U.S. Constitution. So I am troubled by this. I think it's something that Trump is going to need to work on. If he wants to get larger and larger segments of the young voters he's already siphoning away from Hillary Clinton, then he has to swing towards libertarianism on the Second Amendment and domestic surveillance. We should have an externalizing policy when it regards groups like ISIS. Build the wall, keep them out in the first place. If they're found here, fucking put them up on a pike or something. But simply putting somebody on a list and saying, oh, well, I know they haven't had a trial, but fuck their rights. You know, they're a U.S. citizen, but who cares? That's not the way that it works in a constitutional republic. So that would be my thoughts on it. I don't like that about Trump. That's one of the biggest sticking points that I've had. I don't care about his wall. I don't disagree with him on many of the things he says. As far as the Second Amendment goes, though, that's really the sort of thing that an Obama or a Clinton would say, or a Boehner, somebody like that. And no, I don't think that that's appropriate at all for the candidate of the GOP to be rallying the cry to do exactly what the Senate Republicans wanted to do all along, which was always unconstitutional, still is, and always will be. That's about all. Peace out.